Hello, everyone. It's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and I'm joined again today by Tomer. What's up, Tomer?
Hey Seth, how's it going?
It's going well. We're ready to talk some more Commander 2016. Today, we are previewing Entropic Uprising, one of the new Commander 2016 decks. You could argue the best Commander 2016 deck because it's the only one that doesn't include white cards. And you know how I feel about white cards in Commander.
And it has the coolest face card, I would say. Ogre Wizard? What?
Yeah, the four color commander for this deck is super sweet, but we'll talk about that in a minute. First, like we did last time, Tomer, why don't you just give us an overview of this deck? Who might want it, what it does, some general thoughts on the Entropic Uprising deck.
Righto. So you're looking at a pre-constructed deck to choose, to play, to mess around with, and you come across Entropic Uprising. And I think the main sticking theme about this deck is chaos. You don't want a very specific theme that goes very similar to every other card, just like very obvious synergies. You want to mix and match. You want some flavor here and there, a lot of variety. This is the deck for you. It's all about these seemingly random effects that do synergize to an extent, but not as wholly as the other ones. This deck is in particular, it's aggressive, but it's mostly about doing cool, big splashy things. It's very much, I think, a Johnny type of deck where you're just doing craziness and you just want to see what happens. You're doing craziness for the sake of craziness, and stuff cascades into other craziness, and then randomly you win the game because certain pieces line up right. This is the type of deck for you. You want variance. You want chaos. Entropic Uprising is a deck that you want to pick.
Yeah, this one seems like one of the most fun decks to play, but it also feels like, as far as theme, one of the more scattered decks where you don't have a real solid, we talked about breed lethality, very solid +1/+1 counter theme. You don't really get that with Entropic Uprising. Instead, like you said, crazy stuff is going to happen, for better or worse. You don't really know exactly how it's going to turn out, but it seems like a really fun deck to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when you do pull out a win, and I think this deck is very capable of pulling out a win, it's going to come out of a very unexpected spot. You're just going to kind of stumble into it, and you'll be like, oh, opponent has lots of cards in graveyard. Oh, I just cascaded into Guilt Feeder. Well, boom. And then I win the game. And it's all these effects are just going to randomly kind of happen.
Well, let's get to the individual cards, and we will start with the four-colored commander from the deck, and is it a good one? Yidris, Maelstrom Wanderer. This is my pick for the best of the four-color commanders. This card feels absurd to me, Tomer, but what do you think?
I think also this one has to be the best commander out there. Not just for the fun factor. I think this is a very fun commander, and it's probably my favorite of the bunch. But also in terms of power ceiling, I think this one is the one that you can really make competitive if you so chose. This one has a really high ceiling on the shenanigans you can pull off.
Yeah, to me, so people love Cascade, and Cascade is a super powerful ability, and right now we have two big Cascade commanders. We have Maelstrom Wanderer, which triggers when it enters a battlefield. You get a couple of triggers, or when you cast it. And then we have Rashmi, which triggers once each turn and essentially cascades. The power of Yidris is it gives you potential for really insane big turns. I think when things go well and you get in that combat damage, I think this is more powerful than either of the other Cascade commanders that are out there.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I feel like he's a little bit more vulnerable than Maelstrom Wanderer, which has always been a very popular commander, one of the most popular in the entire format. Whenever you cast Maelstrom Wanderer, you always get two cascades, and he comes in with built-in haste for your entire team, so you can go in swinging immediately. Yidris has a little bit more vulnerabilities. His cascade ability only happens when he deals combat damage to a player. So first of all, if you want to start cascading the turn he comes into play, You're going to need to have a haste enabler. You're probably going to need some way of protecting him from targeted removal so he can actually get in there. And you probably want some evasion. He does have trample, and he is a relatively big creature. However, this is a format of big creatures. So you might want some help, like a Whisper Silk Cloak, which is in the deck as well, to help him get there. But the payoff is so much higher than the other two, I would say. Giving all your spells Cascade in your hand this turn is insane. Like, you can cast, I don't know, like, as many cards that are in your hand. That's how many you can cascade, and it's bonkers once you build around it.
I think my only concern for Yidris is it feels like out of all the commanders in Commander 2016, the one that immediately gets a target painted on it the most. Almost like when you play Edric or something and everyone's like, oh my god, we gotta kill that or things are gonna go horribly wrong. I get that same feeling with Yidris because really it only takes one turn and things will go from nothing going on to whoever has Yidris, their board just being completely out of control in that one turn. So I expect that the rest of the table is going to really focus on killing Yidris, if at all possible, as soon as you cast it.
Yeah, I think important point to note with Edric, at least, people know that he's a big problem. However, they're also very greedy, so they're going to still leave him alone to draw those sweet, sweet cards. There is no bribery with Yidris. He just says, you better deal with me now or else I'm going to do something really, really broken. And no, I'm not helping you out at all like Edric does. So he has no politics to help him. He is very much, I think, like Narset, where Narset, if she attacks one time, she could potentially just win the game on the spot. Yidris has the exact same potential. I see him in a competitive setting. You're going to want to focus on maybe going storming off or just slinging a bunch of free spells and generating a lot of mana and then winning the game off that. I think that's where he's going to really shine on a competitive scene. However, if you just want to build a cool deck, he's also really good for that as well. He's just, cascading is just so much value, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, let's move on from Yidris and talk about the other commanders in the deck. Next up, we have Vile Smasher the Fierce, a new Rakdos-colored commander. Goblin Berserker. Tomer, what do you think about the little goblin?
I really like this one. I'm not usually the most aggressive commander player, but in terms of doing damage for just 3 mana, this is really efficient. Whenever you cast your first spell each turn, the Vile Smasher deals damage equal to the spell's converted mana cost to the opponent chosen at random. Yeah, it's random. However, the amount of damage this goblin can output is absurd. If you, for example, delve a Treasure Cruise, you can cast a Treasure Cruise for 1 blue mana. However, it does still have a converted mana cost of 8, and then boom, you do 8 damage to the Fates. It also really works well with flash abilities or instant speed abilities because it's the first spell you cast each turn, not on your turn. So you could potentially cast a spell on every single person's turn and keep getting those triggers off. So it's a lot of damage for 3 mana.
Yeah, this feels like if they printed a 3 mana goblin-y version of Kravik the Merciless, that's what it reminds me of. The direct damage to the face. And I think it's pretty unique. I think you could play this just in an aggressive deck to deal damage. It also could be a commander in some sort of random theme deck because it does deal damage to a random opponent. So I think you could also build around that aspect of it and build like random tribal featuring Vile Smasher as your commander. So I think it's a neat card. Not one of my personal favorites, but I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And to riff off your chaos theme, I know there's one card that says whenever a person casts a spell, each opponent also gets to cast a spell as well, or something to that extent, which would trigger Vile Smasher's ability. And it could be a very effective win condition for the Chaos decks.
Well, our next partner commander is my pick for the best partner commander, Kydal, chosen of Krufix. Oh my god. So I asked you about Deep Close Gate, if that was bannable. You said no. What about this? Is this to the level of bannable, like we've seen with some other Krufix themes cards in the past?
I still think no. I think it's still it's absurd when you start drawing a bunch of cards and then make a lot of mana to draw even more cards. It's my favorite thing to do in the format, in Magic in general. So obviously I love this card too, but I don't think it's bannable. I think she requires the setup she requires is enough that she's not going to be too ridiculous, I don't think. But she's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that your brainstorm is also a colorless dark ritual, just that one line of text right there seems really busted to me. It seems like there is a way to turn this into something that taps for like 20 mana or something ridiculous if you just chain together cantrips in different spells. A wheel effect automatically makes 7 mana. Like, there's some really scary things that can potentially happen with this card.
Absolutely. And I think it's a flavor win too, because she goes very well with the god Krufix. Because what he can do is he can store all your mana that you make. Instead of it disappearing from your mana pool at the end of the phase, you get to keep it as colorless mana until you use it. So she goes very well with her actual god that she's a prophet of. So I really like the flavor aspect of that as well.
We got one more partnered commander in this deck, and it is Thrasios Triton Hero, a merfolk wizard, and it reminds me a bit of Coiling Oracle if it's on the battlefield. What do you think of this one, Tomer?
Well, I'm not too excited about Thrasios. I think his ability is it's okay. It's good, but it does cost 4 mana to use. He doesn't have an enter the battlefield ability like Coiling Oracle, so he is basically just a mana sink. He's very good, obviously, with Kaidel that we just looked at, because she can generate a huge amount of mana, and then you can actually put that excess mana to use if you want on the scry and draw ability. But I don't know. I feel like without just generating huge amounts of mana, Thrasios doesn't seem to be that great. But if you are in a specific deck that does generate more mana that you can spend, then this is a good mana sink.
The best argument I've heard people use in favor of Thrasios is if you have infinite mana, and whenever you have to start off your argument with if you have infinite mana, it's probably really busted. Let me tell you, there probably about half of the cards printed in the game of Magic are super busted if you have infinite mana. When you have infinite mana, the bar of a card being good is really low. So I think you're right. Like, it's cool if you have a ton of mana. It's a good mana sink, but it doesn't feel like one of the better Simic commanders to me. I think all of these partnered commanders will probably be more popular than they would be if they didn't have partner, because it does you can do additional things with the partnered ability. But if you're playing a straight blue-green deck, I think there are several commanders, maybe many commanders I would want to play before Thrasios. Well, let's move on from the commanders and talk about the other cards in our deck. First up, we talked about this deck having a sort of random theme to it. Well, we have a pretty random card in Boom Pile. Is this card playable, Tomer?
Absolutely. It's a staple, actually, for one of my favorite formats, or archetypes, which is the coin flip deck. I don't think you'd want to play Boom Pile in any other deck, but if you have Boom Pile in the coin flip deck and you have a certain legendary artifact called Krark's Thumb, which says whenever you flip a coin, you flip 2 coins and then you choose whichever result you want, then that's what? A 75% chance for you to win the flip and destroy all permanents when you wanted to. And that's only for 4 mana and immediately board wipes plus, because it's all non-land permanents. It's pretty amazing with Krark's Thumb. Otherwise, it's not very good.
Yeah, I mean, it's always worth noting colorless wrath effects, because they used to be really rare. If you're playing a green deck or a blue deck and you wanted to sweep away the board, there weren't a lot of options. But over recent years, Wizards has printed more and more of those. We've had Oblivion Stone, we have Perilous Vault, we have the original Nevernal's Disc. So Boom Pile just seems to be a notch below all those cards because of the random element. But I think you're right. if you're flipping coins, it probably jumps up to the top of the list. It doesn't enter tap like Nevernull's disc, and it seems fairly efficient and powerful. Oblivion Stone, Perilous Vault are really expensive because they're like 4 to cast and then 3 or 4 or 5 to activate. So it is really good if you knew you could win the flip every time. It's basically a colorless Wrath of God or Day of Judgment. So I think in the coin flip deck, it's amazing. Otherwise, it's a little risky. I imagine you losing coin flips and as a result losing the game because your opponent's like, you tried to kill all my stuff and now we're gonna punish you.
Yeah, I would not risk a board wipe on a coin flip, unfortunately, unless I get to flip 2 coins. And then 75% chance. Those are odds I'm willing to take.
Well, let's move on to one of my favorite cards from this deck, and it's just so perfectly flavorful, so sweet. Cruel Entertainment. So I like the flavor. I think this card's really sweet, but is it good, Tomer? Is this something you can actually put in a deck, or is it just like a unique and kind of fun effect?
I think it falls in the latter, unfortunately, because it does cost 7 mana. And then here's the thing. Let's say you choose 2 target players and like 2 opponents, and you say just you guys have fun, and both of them decide, you know what, we're gonna work together. Then the card does nothing, right? It doesn't do anything if both players decide to do an optimal turn for each other. Like they make an agreement and they have an optimal turn. I think 99.9% of the time that's actually not going to happen because the opportunity to screw over somebody is so high that you might as well just go for it. And that's when the card is going to be really fun. You just choose 2 opponents, and they're both just going to, like, wreck each other's boards and then get angry at each other for it. So they've made, like, two enemies at the table, and then you can just sit back and relax. So I'm gonna love this card. I'm gonna play it the first opportunity as soon as it's available online. That's going to be in my deck in Commander Clash. I'm calling it.
The nightmare scenario is you play this and the 2 people you choose spend their turn attacking and killing you in retribution, and that could happen. If you want to be stealing your opponent's turn, I could imagine if you can work your board position and get your hand empty, you could use it to your advantage. But then worst fears is 1 more mana, I think, and you just straight up take an opponent's turn and you don't have to let them play your turn. So I think it's mostly a fun card. I like, as we've been talking about with the rest of this deck, the chaotic element it adds to the game, and I think people will play it for that because out of all the Commander 2016 cards, this is the one I'm most excited to see resolve. I don't think it'll be good for me. I don't know what'll happen, but I think whatever happens is going to be entertaining and probably pretty interesting. So it scores points in that end, but as far as being good, not so much.
Yeah, it's not competitive by any stretch. I think it's going to be very political because if you do give 2 people the opportunity to take each other's turns, I don't think they're both going to be like benevolent. They're both going to be like, I'm going to do the worst thing possible. And it's going to be hilarious and I'm going to love it. But it can backfire. It can do nothing. And it is 7 mana. So it is a pretty big investment if it doesn't do anything useful. So I'm going to run it. I'm going to love it. But it's not a great card objectively, I would say.
Next we have one of the cards I'm least excited about out of all Commander 2016. And I mean, this card is fine. It's not bad. Curtain's Call. You kill 2 creatures in a 4-player game. It's going to cost you 3 mana. So, I don't know, Tomer. Am I missing something here, or is this just a reasonable removal spell?
I think it's actually pretty good. Again, if we're keeping the criteria to be 3 mana most of the time, it stacks actually very favorably with a card I do like that also kills 2 creatures in black. It's called Ashes to Ashes. It exiles 2 target non-artifact creatures, and then it deals 5 damage to you. It's also a sorcery, so not as good if you're paying 3 mana. So that stacks very favorable to it. I think there's another one that also does the same thing, except it's non-black creatures and deals 5 damage to you, and it's instant speed. So that compares better to this card. But I think it's actually pretty good. I mean, paying 3 mana to destroy 2 creatures, no clauses of non-black, non-artifact, doesn't deal damage to you, and it's pretty easy to cast as well.
It reminds me of the Morbid one, and I can't think of the name of it now. From
Mm,
maybe two commander lists ago, it was 2 black mana, and you kill a creature instant speed, or if you had Morbid, if something had died, you get 2 at instant speed. And
mhm.
I think those cards, both of those cards, are good. I think when I said it's one of my least favorite, it's more that it's just not exciting. Like, we have plenty of removal spells. I think you'll play Curtain Skull, and I think it will be good, because killing any 2 creatures at instant speed for 3 mana is obviously good, but it just doesn't. I don't know. We've been talking about all these crazy effects and coin flips and cascading, and then you get to Curtain Skull, and it's like, it just kills things.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the card you mentioned, Malicious Affliction, very similar. Morbid can kill up to 2 creatures. However, it's non-black creatures. So again, this
uh,
one has that it can kill anything. So that's always nice. I don't know. I like it. I'm gonna definitely play with it. But it does get worse as the opponents drop. So that's not great.
Well, let's move on to a card that is certainly interesting. Goblin Spymaster, near the top of my favorite art from Commander 2016 list. What do you think of this one, Tomer?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the artwork, Wayne Reynolds did a really good job on this one. He is an awesome goblin pirate thingy. I don't know. It's amazing. But playability wise, I actually love this card because I've long played decks. I've done variants of these decks where basically you give your opponents creatures, an army, and you force them to attack and you pillar forward up so they can't attack you, so they must attack each other, and they essentially kill each other, and you just sit back and watch and just like drink a beer or something as it all unfolds. So I have a 5-color Enchantress deck that I built out of like cardboard that has that philosophy. I've also built a variant of it with Gahiji, where Gahiji says if an opponent is being attacked, creatures that attacking that opponent get +2/+0. So it incentivizes you and your opponents to attack people that aren't you. So that works really well with giving your opponent's forces to attack with each other. And Goblin Spymaster does both those things. He gives your opponent's creatures, 1/1 goblin creatures, so they're not that scary, but it also forces them to attack with all their creatures. So it does both things that I like about that.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty unique and interesting effect. Obviously, it's not something you just want to jam in decks because it does have potential to kind of backfire depending
Yeah.
on what the board state is like and what your deck is like. But I think you mentioned a really specific archetype where it could be very good in, and that's kind of what I think of this card. I think you don't just play this in your typical deck, it's sort of somewhat build around me because it does come with a lot of risk, but I think it's really fun and unique. And cards that make your opponent have to kill their own creatures, like your opponent might have to do with the goblin token that you give them, are always really interesting and unique. You put your opponent in this really weird scenario because normally in Magic, you want your creatures to live. That's like opposite of everything you
Hmm.
want in a Magic game. So I like cards that can kind of flip the normal rules and norms of Magic on its head and make you do things that are very unusual. And Goblin Spymaster is one of those cards. So I think it's really fun, but needs a specific deck to really be good.
Yeah, it needs to be in that one specific archetype, or else you probably want to skip it. Like you said, it definitely has a lot of room to backfire because they can just attack you if forced into attacking you, and they probably want to at that point. And they could also use the 1/1 creatures that you give them for value. Like if an opponent has a sacrifice deck or just has a skull clamp on the board, then they'll be very happy to draw 2 extra cards off it. So you have to definitely build around it. But the deck archetype that I described, I love it. It's one of my favorite decks, so I'm very excited to add Goblin Spymaster to it.
Well, next on our list, and our last new card from today's deck, we have a card that I really want to hear your opinion on, Tomer. Runehorn Hellkite. So, what do you think about this dragon?
Anytime you can cast a spell from your graveyard has a lot of potential, especially when it wheels. Wheeling is amazing. So I love this card already. Yeah, it costs 6 mana to wheel, and you have to exile it. It's still a free card. If you can just dump it into your graveyard for free, and then essentially flashback it for 6 mana and draw a new hand, that's amazing. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I think this card is really bonkers. is a card that reminds me of how every time I build a commander deck, I find myself amazed that Survival of the Fittest, for some reason, is a legal card. So it's really easy to stock your graveyard in commander if that's what you want to be doing. And a 6 mana wheel sounds bad, but you got to remember that this is 6 mana uncounterable instant speed Wheel of Fortune effect. And when you consider all those pieces, 6 mana actually starts to sound fairly reasonable. If you had a sorcery that was uncounterable instant speed wheel, I would expect it was 4 or 5 mana, and this has the upside of having a 5/5 flying body to go along with it. So I think this card is super powerful, and I expect it'll see a lot of play.
Yeah, I see a lot of archetypes for this. Like the wheel archetypes, obviously, like Niv Mizzet, Nikasar, and all those, will enjoy having an extra wheel effect because you can use one wheel effect to first dump it, or you could use green-based decks, like you said, with Evolutionary Leap to dump it, or you could even run it in Dragon Tribal decks. For example, Zerillion of the Claw is a mono-red Dragon Tribal deck that basically lets you search your library for a dragon and sneak attack it into play. So you have shenanigans there as well. If you sacrifice it, put it into the graveyard, now your mono red deck has another source of card advantage. So there's a lot of applications here, and it's really fun. And also, worst case scenario, you can just play a 5/5 flyer for 6 mana if you have nothing better to do. That's still a really good threat.
Yeah, I mean, 5/5 flyer for 6 with no other abilities isn't great in Commander, but it's reasonable. You're not going to be sad to have that on the battlefield. And I also like that I expect this card will be pretty inexpensive. In wheel effects, for some reason, tend to be way more expensive than you'd think. Wheel of Fortune's on the reserve list. It's like 15, 20, 25 bucks. So I like that there's a budget wheel option, even if it isn't 3 mana. Having more budget wheels is nice because wheel effects do facilitate some really interesting, potentially budget decks like you were talking about. And having another budget option, I think, is a pretty good thing and a pretty big deal. Anyway, that is our review of the Entropic Uprising deck. So, Tomer, on the way out the door today, do you have a favorite card that we talked about today?
Oof. I think, I think my favorite two have to be Yidris and Vial Smasher. I think both of them are going to have really interesting implications. Yidris himself has a lot going on, so he's going to be really fun to brew around. And Vial Smasher is the first time in a while that I'm getting very excited for a more aggressive style play. I think there's a lot of partner abilities with this Goblin, and it could either fit in like straight aggro or even chaos, as you mentioned. So I'm really excited to start building decks around it.
Well, I mentioned in the beginning that Yidris is my favorite of the 4-color commanders that they printed in Commander 2016, but it's not my favorite card in the deck. My favorite card is Kaidel. Kaidel it does everything I enjoy. I think you said it best, Homer. You draw cards, and then it makes you mana so you can draw more cards. And to me, that is about the most important and most fun thing I can do in a game of Commander. So it just really supports a play style that I like, and I think it has potential to be pretty absurd with the amount of mana that it can make. So I'm excited to try out Kaidel once the cards are released on Magic Online.
Oh boy, the implications of Edric. I'm excited for it already.
Well, Tomer, thanks for taking the time to hang out. We'll be back tomorrow to break down another deck. And thank you to everyone for watching. So we'll talk to you tomorrow to preview another Commander 2016 deck, and we'll talk to you soon.